So this is going to be very informal session. We just wanted to kind of put some teachers and some tutors that are planning and working through some of these questions, just like the students are, along with obviously some students that might be taking the exam. So we're going to add one more person. Okay. So I have with me today, so welcome everybody. Thank you for taking some time. I have with me today Pat Savidge, who teaches math at Delbarton School. Peter O'Connell teaches biology, and myself. So we're going to talk a little bit about the AP in general and some considerations for the AP in general, and then Pete and Pat and I will just kind of talk about some thoughts they have about preparing students for their specific AP test, specifically bio and calculus especially. So see some other people are joining in. So just to jump right into it. So some major testing changes, and these may be news to you, these may not be news to you, but just some things that obviously are going on. So they're taking a 2.5-hour test and going to 45-minute FRQs, which are short essays. They're often they're trying to measure very discrete and specific skills. So we'll talk about this a little bit later. Most exams are going to be May 11th to the 22nd. They're giving some makeup dates that are going to be later than that. But basically, so if you take the AP Bio, everyone in the world is going to take the AP Bio test at the same time, which they've never done before. As a computing person, I have logistical questions about how that is going to work out. So just the testing of your setup and making sure that you feel great about everything on exam day, that's certainly going to be part of the picture, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. College credit. The College Board has said that, they're very confident that they're going to give college credit. You talk to some people around for the exams. You talk to some people around education, they're not so confident. It seems unlikely, or it seems like it's a very different thing to take a 45-minute essay than to measure a year's worth of learning. So if that factors in on your decision and your mental health right now, I think it's a little bit less clear how exactly the colleges are going to respond than what the College Board is saying. But that's my own personal opinion and talking to some people. So we were just talking about some of the resources that College Board has made available, especially on their YouTube channel. The early returns on that are really pretty positive, that they've made some good stuff available. So when possible, we'll talk about ways that you can study outside and where some of this good stuff is. Obviously, the open note element of the test is a huge part of the preparation, but I think you can also really go wrong with the open note, because you can note yourself to death and just have so much in front of you that you can't actually focus on what is a very, very short period of time that you have to answer the question. So I think the open note is good. It should help you prepare, but I also wouldn't recommend having every single note you took for AP Chem in front of you while you're trying to respond to a 30-minute essay. So and then if you are taking language and music, there is still a speaking and listening similar to what's happened before. So a little caveat there for the mostly essay-based thing. So just in general, as our teachers are kind of working through some of this stuff, I think the first thing we need to do is, in looking at the FRQ questions, right? So identify and prepare materials exactly like what the FRQ is asking you to do. So in AP Language and Comp, it's FRQ number 2. So it's about analyzing, a piece of prose and explaining the rhetorical devices that are in there in an essay question. So you should know exactly which, for the A push, it's a DBQ. So you should get, if you're taking the American U.S. history, you should get really good at analyzing documents and really good at writing DBQs. So identifying exactly which of those skills are, and then preparing and thinking about, are you going to have notes digitally? Are you going to have notes that are going to be analog? How are you going to organize yourself? What exactly you're going to have on the desk? And then practicing, that skill. So I think to really like to help kids think about this, like it's become a writing test. And we had Phil Shockett on last week, and I think he's a great writer himself and really thinks about writing in a very kind of detailed and in a very kind of let me admit Henry here. He thinks about this like that makes sense, I think, in a way that many people don't. In that, you need to really write a lot. You need to write this is things that Phil was saying. You need to write every day. So if you're not that comfortable with writing, let's say you're more comfortable with multiple choice, then it's very important that you learn and that you just get a lot of repetitions at actually doing the physical writing. I think you have to practice some of the timed writing components of it. So, can you, just like if you were to do a 2-mile race, then you need to think about in those time parameters, how fast and how organized can you be in that 45 minutes. And I think this was something Phil really talked about, which was very interesting. Like, where are you going to take the test? What are you going to have on the desk? Like, try to recreate the exact circumstances that are going to exist for you on the test day. So that's something that Phil especially can, if you're interested in some of that stuff, can work specifically with people about, with some of the writing and some of his tutoring information is up on the Centercourt stuff. This is totally plagiarized from him. But, in that idea of like, it's great to even practice what it's like to fail, because the last thing that you want to do is you practice and you have one shot at it and to get tripped up, and then to seize and have that moment where you can't get all the ideas out that you want to get out. So even practicing like what it means to struggle and having a couple of things, okay, that doesn't work. I put all these notes together, but it was too many notes, really trying to organize yourself. And I think you have enough time to do this. It's you're going to have a month to practice stuff that basically you've learned in terms of the content portion of it. So those are some thoughts that we had kind of right off the top of the bat, just as a community of tutors. So with that, I wanted to kind of open up and just talk to Pete and Pat. And if you guys have questions, I see some people have joined. Just feel free to throw them into the chat. Maybe you wanted something covered in a little bit more detail. Maybe you have questions specific to AP Bio. So first question I want to throw out to you guys, just like to Pat and Pete, like just what are some of the first, when all these changes got made, what were some of your first reactions, and what was the kind of first thing going through your mind when you think about preparing kids for the exam?
I guess my biggest thing was just like how in the world are they going to be able to test a year's worth of knowledge just on 2 free response questions in calc. So that was really the biggest question mark for me, was like, okay, well, how much of the year are they going to be able to cover in just these 2 questions? Are they going to be able to cover everything in differentiation as well as integrals? I know with the multiple parts per each question that they'll probably be able to do that, but it's still going to be kind of a limited scope of how much they can actually get to.
Right. And then so like if they only have to ask what question would they ask, So I think that's the other part of it too, right? Like,
right.
Pete, what were you thinking about?
Yeah, going off those same lines, I think as soon as I found out it was just 2 questions, it sort of shifted away from the individual details that you see in biology and more towards the overarching concepts and how they connect together. So shifting our mindsets away from, well, we have to do well in that multiple choice exam to, well, now we have to actually identify and be able to integrate different concepts throughout the year. So how can we sort of prepare ourselves to do that? How can we shift our mindsets over to that sort of type of thinking?
Yeah, so Tom Bennett kind of talked about that a little bit, because he talking about AP Gov and APUSH, because I think our tendency is to like, well, it's open notes, so I'm going to have like every possible part of everything detailed out so I can. But his thing was kind of like, no, you need to make sure that you are carrying like those overarching themes of US Gov and being able to like trace all that stuff together. That's really, in terms of like the notes, that's really what you should prepare, is sort of like some of the detailed stuff, but also some of the the large scale stuff. So I thought that was interesting. Like
Right.
that's an easy thing to do. I don't know if you guys are on the same lines, but so what do you like working with kids? What are you thinking about doing? You know, if you had kids for a couple classes or kids, you know, at our school, like what are you thinking about in terms of structuring your time with those kids? How would you go about preparing, or how would these, you know, some of the people on the line right now, how would you prepare? Like, what are some activities you think would be meaningful in terms of the limited time that people have?
Yeah, I think just looking at the big ideas of the AP Bio test, you can already scratch off the evolution idea, because that's Unit 7 and that's Unit 8, and those are just not going to be on the exam this year. So focusing more on the big idea 2, 3, and 4 that are going to potentially be on the exam, and then sort of subdividing those into the units throughout the year. So we've got the chemistry of life, cell structure, cellular energetics, cell communication, heredity, and gene expression. So all the micro sort of biological processes are potentially going to be on this exam. So sort of subdividing those into those major units, and then going from there and doing a review unit by unit and how they sort of fit into those larger ideas, just so we can get to that conceptual level in biology.
Good. So it's like you got to get to the large scale, but start with reviewing some of the detail part of it, and then like that kind of builds out that big umbrella to some of those big ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Pat, what are you thinking about in terms of working with students specifically?
Yeah, I would say for calc, the biggest thing is just going to be to get out there and just start working on problems. At this point, like, you hopefully have nothing else that you need to be learning. At this point, you hopefully have all the tools in your belt and you're ready to just get out there and start working on problems. The biggest thing with the calc and the free response, I know that trips people up, is they don't even really understand what the question is giving them or what the question is asking. Are they giving me a certain rate? Are they giving me some function that I'm going to need to take the derivative? What is the question actually asking me? So just running through problems and being able to understand, like, okay, this is what they're giving me. This is what they're looking for. This is what the answer is supposed to be. And then just knowing how to complete those steps in between, which hopefully is the easiest part of the problem, is actually doing those steps.
So it's funny because like word problem, it's like, oh, well, it's just a word. Well, word problems are some of the most difficult and complex things that exist in math, right? Like, because of what you're talking about. So you're saying you don't even need to like carry through a whole problem set, but like even just identifying, like setting up your problem and saying like, all right, here's the text. Well, what are they giving me and what are they asking for? And what, you know, what's my thought process in terms of how I'm going to attack the problem?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's so huge. And I know my younger brother's actually taking the AB exam this year. And I asked him, like, what are you doing to prepare? What is your teacher preparing for you? And he was like, well, my teacher is just giving us like FRQ after FRQ after FRQ. That's all we're doing right now. And seeing how close can we get to that perfect score out of 9.
Yeah. And I think like there's a tendency to just like prepare in terms of like, you know, the tests are there, but then there's, I think, something else to like really strategizing the problems too. And making sure like that the mistakes that you make on the word problems are things that you're clearing up. But I remember that was my brother too, when he was, and it's a little bit of a different exam, but when he was studying for the MCAT, it was like, how do you get really good at the MCAT? Like, well, you take the practice MCAT like 1,000 times and you lock yourself in a room and you kind of do it. So there's nothing like, and I think that's a service too that we can provide to as tutors, is like just getting as many reps, like getting your butt in the seat and just doing it over and over and over again, because that is what is going to be tested. So what, like in terms of some resources, or whether maybe they're free things that are available or things that you've used in the past, like what are some things you'd want to make available to kids, or you would recommend that students use preparing for the test?
I think, first of all, just starting with that AP curriculum PDF that you get at collegeboard.com, just looking through each of those major points, what they're looking for is what you should also be looking for. In terms of other resources to help you review the actual material, Crash Course is a great one. So as soon as you sort of subdivide into the concept that you were a little hazy about or something that was covered earlier in the year, look that up on Crash Course. They have great resources there. Albert has a bunch of different free multiple choice answers and questions that you can be asked that sort of mimic the multiple choice section of the AP exam, that is still useful at this point in time, even though it's a longer answer. Also, if you are even struggling with the actual concept that was taught in class, there's a pretty basic YouTube channel called Amoeba Sisters, and they're really good at overarching concepts and how they connect to each other. So that's another resource that you could use. And then also the AP YouTube channel, like Rob had mentioned earlier, they've been doing lessons daily with demonstrations that are helpful for AP Bio specifically.
Well, that's awesome. I just the Amoeba Sisters, huh? That's very nerdy science teacher thing. I'm just going to drop a couple of these in the chat. That's great. And I know we've used Albert a lot in our school. I'm not sure how familiar people are with that, but that's been a good resource for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pat, what are some things in terms of your guys preparing?
I would say, like, I know AP Classroom has a bunch of practice questions that you can get out there and do. And then if you even just Google like AP Calc AB exam, you can find some of the questions that have been on past exams. And it's great because you can just pull up one PDF that has the questions. And then after you've completed the questions right there, they have scoring guidelines.
Yep.
They have scoring statistics, so you can see, well, how well am I doing compared? Like, if I'm getting a 6 out of 9 on this question, like, is that actually a good score, or are people averaging 7 or 8 out of 9?
Right. Yeah, I think what's been really helpful too in my experience for the AP is for a teacher, so for like you guys, to take students through scoring, like paragraphs that are scored, and explaining, or essays that are scored, and explaining like, this is why, or on the FRQ too, maybe for AP language, like, this is why this is a 7, or this is why this is an 8. And I think that's where it's hard, I think, for students to do this on their own, is they could do essay after essay, but without a feedback piece to it from a teacher, I think it's hard. So again, kind of what I think we would hope to provide in terms of value for you guys, but or what, like, you might ask your own teacher at school. So all right, so maybe talking about the open note element now, like, and this is, I think we did this last Monday too, and it was like they had just dropped the open note thing on the Friday. So what's your thinking about open notes, the open note part of it, like what you would ask kids to prepare? What do you, like, I guess my question too is, like, what do you have on the desk on the actual day of the exam? And I would just caveat this too with, what works for one person may not work for everybody else. And I think that's part of the challenge of the open note thing as well, is that you gotta, like, just because I think it's a certain way, you may take the test a couple times or take a couple FRQs and say, well, that doesn't work for me too. But what are some thoughts you guys have in terms of that?
For the actual test day, before any sort of exam, I would have a study guide ready. And I think for bio specifically, I think I would take a sheet of paper per unit. So unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4, unit 5, unit 6, have that on your desk, because you're taking 2 questions. And those questions are not going to be on every single unit. So the quicker you can identify which unit this question is talking about, you grab that note sheet, and that's your reference for that 25 to 45 minutes.
Right.
And then you can keep using that content, because you don't need to talk about unit 5 if it's not in the question, if it's not relevant. Right. So have those different sheets separated out early, so then you can grab the reference that you need not all of your notes all at once. And I think when it comes to open note testing, study like you would for a normal exam. I think the biggest curse to open note exams is people think that they have that sort of safety net for their notes, so they don't end up studying as in-depthly as they would if it were closed note. But the reality is that open note is there because they can't really enforce any other policy. So they're making it open note, which is a benefit to you if you reorganize your notes and don't get overwhelmed by the entire volume that you took throughout the year.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like a couple teachers have talked about coding the notes or being able to like basically flip to or pull the exact thing that you need. You know, if it's U.S. history, like, all right, we're talking about the Spanish-American War, and so here are all the players, and then being able to kind of move everything else and put blinders on in that exam. But then also hitting some of the major themes as well and connecting that, because that is the difference between some of the smaller scores and some of the higher scores. So it's kind of like the micro and the macro thinking too. Pat, what about AP Calc? It's a little different than some of the more content-driven.
Right. Yeah, for Calc, it makes me nervous because I think the open note can kind of be a trap.
Yeah.
Even with some of my students, they hear open note and they're like, "Oh, Mr. Savidge, like you're the greatest. This is awesome." And then like it goes the total opposite way of what they expect. Because they do kind of the same thing. They get the formulas down on their sheet. They're like, great, I have the formulas. Like everything's good to know, but they don't know when to apply which formula. And just like Pete was saying, they're like, hey, this is my safety net. Like, if I get stuck, like I'm just going to take a look at my notes and see if I can figure it out there. So as far as the open note goes, I definitely obviously you're going to want to reorganize, just getting down some of like the main concepts. Like, okay, if I'm looking for an average rate of change, this is what I need to do. If I'm looking for an average value, this is what I need to do. Hopefully by this point, you've seen enough problems where you know what to do in each of those specific situations. But keeping that almost as your safety net is just kind of like, oh, like if I start freaking out, like I'm looking for an instantaneous rate of change and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to do this or this, having that right there could help you out. But it's definitely not something you want to rely on and spend too much time like trying to rifle through your notes and figure out like, okay, well, what am I even supposed to be using in this situation? I just see a bunch of formulas.
Right.
I don't even know which one to use.
Right. So maybe having like worst case scenario, having a safety net of saying like, all right, if it's X problem where they're asking for rate of change, then this is generally what the formulas I'll need. But like for you, you're saying open note is almost immaterial for a student who's really strong.
If you're ready to go, you shouldn't even need the notes.
Right. Right. And I think that's probably unique to maybe AB, BC Calc, than almost maybe any other discipline. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's a time management issue with that too, with the open note. Because if you're spending too much time looking through your notes instead of taking the exam, you should be looking at your notes maybe 2 minutes out of 25 minutes if it's the second question, or if it's the first question in bio, maybe 5 minutes out of that whole 35 minutes that you get. It should be very minimal in terms of how much you're referencing your notes.
Yeah. And so I think like you need to, my background is teaching English. So it's like the first 5 minutes of this stuff, you always say you need to outline, you need to plan. But I'm seeing Matt is pinging me in the chat. But so now the open note part of it is like another layer to it. So I think so if you're looking at, you have a month to prepare, I think in the next, and you guys stop me if you're thinking differently, in this next 2 weeks or so, you want to try to get all the materials and all your notes together.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe for Calc it's a little bit different because the note part of it isn't that extensive. Maybe you really just want to start hammering the FRQ stuff. And then you want to start, repetitions of those FRQ questions with your notes.
Yeah.
To say like, oh, this is too much, and then kind of fine tuning what you're going to have on your desk. Would you guys agree with that? Would you add I mean,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right.
I think limiting that reference time too, to actually go through your notes and pick out the right details. You should be able to go, bam, unit 4, this is what we're covering. This is the question, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I loved what you said earlier, I guess, that Phil had mentioned last week, like just simulate your testing environment.
Yeah.
Have your notes there, have your calculator, get a problem out, and then actually time it out. If it's a 25-minute question and you're sneaking it in 24 minutes, you probably want to take another look, because you want to be preparing for that worst case scenario. Like, oh, what if after finishing the problem, I'm going back and checking my answers, realize I did a whole 1 out of the 4 parts of the question incorrectly. So you kind of want to work with that buffer.
Yeah. And even thinking about like the time of day, like at this point too, you're going to be able to see like, am I taking it, they're all Eastern Standard Time, so that's an advantage. I mean, if you live in China, you have to take it in the middle of the night. But like, it's very different to take an exam at 4:00. Like, should you exercise beforehand? Like if it's at 11 o'clock, like how do you kind of plan your day just like you would in a sports context? Like, so that moment you have like maximum well, like one thing you do, if you have a night game, if you're coaching football, you have a night game, you practice at night the day before so that your body gets used to, I mean, and these seem like that's a lot of preparation to go into, take a 45-minute test, but you don't want to walk in and have it be like a unique experience for yourself, right? Because obviously the stress is going to be there. So we're at about 3:45, but we wanted to leave time for people to ask questions. So you can just unmute yourself if you want to just ask something direct, or if you want to use the chat. We all have access to the chat. So we'll just take some time now, and we'll give you guys some time to throw some questions in there. Could be about APs, could be about these guys and what they're doing, could be about your specific AP situation. So any questions you guys have, we'll welcome them now.
Yes, there will be calculations. Statistics is going to play a huge role in the first question because it's an FRQ 1. So recognizing that type of data, so data manipulation. So definitely practice your statistical analyses. There we go. And basic calculations that you have done in the past and in past labs that you did earlier in the year. I would take another look at those.
Awesome. Other questions guys have, and gals? We'll wait a couple more minutes if you guys, something comes up.
All right, so I see your question about writing them out. I personally don't love to type and like use equations on the computer. I would just write it out and then take the pictures and send them in. I'm not sure exactly how the College Board is doing that. I know it's just like take a picture with your phone and then send them in. But I'm guessing that they're going to have a pretty like that the actual feature will work. Just make sure that you're getting all of your notes down. I definitely would recommend writing them out and not using the keyboard for that.
Yeah.
I recommend writing it out.
Yeah, I think that, so they're saying that kind of the fail safe is if I understand the question correctly, the fail safe is writing it and taking a picture, which I think is meant to be like for people that may not have access to for a laptop. So it's like an equity issue that they're trying to solve. But I think Ari makes a good point that and so do you, Pat, for math, that, well, writing it out is probably preferable because it's something that's how you guys have probably practiced it this whole time. So like for, I don't know, an AP language, that's a good question. Like even thinking about an AP language, like I would love to type an essay versus handwrite an essay. But when it comes to write an FRQ essay question for calc, I under very few circumstances would I see the advantage of typing that versus writing it out.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. I don't know, Pete, if bio, the question, questions are different, or how you would think about writing or using the keyboard. It's a good question.
I think it would be fine using the keyboard for bio specifically, because you're creating arguments. That's the main point of it. Is
Right.
Can you make an argument about this phenomena, or can you make an argument about this data? So I think being able to write that on the keyboard is fine.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I mean, like it's an essay basically in some ways. So it's not like, so maybe stat, but same thing, but calc maybe a little bit different. Cool. Other questions people have? All right. So one thing, just as we're finishing up, and I'll just put it in the chat, is there are probably a lot of people here interested in STEM education, are following, are looking to follow their education, STEM education. So we've put together a really great webinar with a professor of science that talks about really preparing kids to succeed in STEM in college, because what we're seeing is that, guys are very interested in pre-med, very interested in these fields, and then they get into college and they really struggle because the demands, and especially the demands on resilience and the demands on how to study and how to understand a topic, are very different than AP. Like AP is not, people say it's a college level course, and it is in some ways, but really it's not, and you need a different set of skills to be successful in college. So that is, I think, could be a great value to you as you sit here, and just like food for thought when you're thinking about being successful, not only in a month, but also down the line. So I recommend that you check out that link I put. It's also available on the Centercourt mailing distribution list that I'm sure you guys get. And I would also say, if you're interested in working more with Pete and Pat with tutoring, that those links are available to you, and we can follow up with people who registered to this with some direct links for that. So they're eager to get rolling. Tara, am I missing anything, or
just that webinar's tonight at 5:30?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll be on it. It's going to be fabulous. He has some good stories, so it'll definitely be worth your while.
Great. Thank you, Tara. Awesome. So with that, I want to respect everybody's time. I'm sure students are busy, so that's it. I will put my email, centercourtclub.com, in the chat too, if anybody wants to reach out directly about questions about anything. And we'll continue to do this. So maybe this was positive for you. You want to hear from some different tutors and talk about some different subjects. Maybe you're taking calc, but you're also taking history or psych, and want to talk more about that. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Good luck with everything, and hope everybody's just staying safe. And again, like, if there's anything we can do to help you guys, I know this is really wearing on high school students, especially, and just want to be there to be a resource for you guys, your family. So even in the comfort of our own home. So take care, and have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Pete and Pat. Great job.